Imagine trading all your women in for somebody else's big back 30-year-old baby mama. Don't that sound like some? And women think that we really got it hard out here being single. Like being single is so bad. Do you hear that? That's what being single for a man sounds like. It's peaceful. It's less expensive. Come on, man. When you paying your way and I'm paying my way, shit, life is easy, but y'all looking for a motherfucking come up, and then you want me to give all my sexual rights to you. That's jail. Most of these niggas in relationships have a motherfucking curfew, and they're not even the only person that this person had children with. They're the second, third, fourth, and fifth option, coming off the motherfucking bench, and is happy to be there. You used to be a starter. Now you're Klay Thompson, nigga.
There is a quiet shift happening that most people only notice once it is already too late. It is not loud, it is not dramatic, and it is not announced on the evening news. It is a slow withdrawal, a collective decision made privately by millions of men who simply decided to stop participating. By the end of this video, you'll understand why so many men are choosing isolation, games, and personal peace over dating, relationships, and social expectations, and why this change is sending shockwaves through modern society. Before we get into it, make sure you like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell and select all if you want more great Angry Guy content and want every single video the moment we release it. Also, check out Angry's Crypto Academy, linked in the description below. The Academy is where you can learn how to protect and safeguard your assets and grow your wealth by learning how to buy, sell, and trade crypto in a clear and practical way. If you care about financial independence and long-term security, go check it out now. And if you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show support, you can always buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. It is a simple way to keep the lights on and the content coming. Now let us talk about what is really happening. What we are witnessing today is not men rebelling, protesting, or demanding change. What we are seeing is something far more powerful and far more disruptive. Men are opting out quietly, systematically, permanently. They are choosing video games or over dating, solitude over relationships, and personal stability over social approval. And they are doing it without asking permission. For decades, men were told they were the problem, that their instincts were outdated, that their presence was intrusive, that their attention was unwanted, unless it came with resources attached. They were told to step back, to listen, to change, to adapt, and eventually to disappear. And many of them listened. They stopped approaching, they stopped initiating, they stopped participating. They did exactly what they were told to do. What nobody anticipated was that once men stepped away, they would discover something unexpected: peace. For many men, removing themselves from dating culture removed stress, anxiety, and financial pressure. It removed uncertainty and constant self-evaluation. It removed the sense of being judged, measured, and found lacking. In its place, men found routines, hobbies, and control over their time. They found that solitude is not the same thing as loneliness. They found that quiet can be restorative rather than empty. Video games became one of the most visible symbols of this shift, not because games are new, but because they offer something modern dating often does not: clear rules, fair feedback, effort that leads to progress, respect for time invested. In a game, if you improve your skills, you advance. If you cooperate, you succeed. If you fail, you understand why. For many men, this felt more honest than modern social dynamics. At the same time, men began reevaluating where their money was going. Dating had become expensive, unpredictable, and often one-sided. Meals, experiences, and emotional labor were expected upfront with no guarantee of mutual interest or long-term connection. As inflation rose and economic pressure increased, many men simply decided the cost no longer made sense. Instead of spending money trying to impress, they started saving. Instead of chasing approval, they invested in themselves. Home gyms replaced public gyms. Streaming replaced nights out. Online communities replaced social spaces where men felt unwelcome or scrutinized. Slowly, entire industries began to feel the absence. Restaurants noticed fewer date nights, bars noticed fewer men buying drinks, gyms noticed declining male memberships, not because men disappeared, but because they relocated. They moved inward, physically and socially. Meanwhile, public conversations continued as if nothing had changed. Advice columns told women to hold standards. Media narratives framed male withdrawal as immaturity or escapism. But beneath the surface, something far more structural was happening. Men were disengaging not out of spite, but out of self preservation. This trend is not limited to one country or culture. Across the developed world, relationship participation is declining. Marriage rates are down. Birth rates are down. Long term partnerships are delayed or avoided entirely. While explanations vary, one consistent factor remains. Men are choosing not to play a game they believe is stacked against them. In places like South Korea and Japan, this dynamic is especially visible. Social expectations, workplace pressures, and legal frameworks created environments where many men concluded that the risks of participation outweighed the rewards. Instead of pushing back publicly, they opted out privately. And once that happened at scale, the consequences became unavoidable. What often gets missed in these discussions is that disengagement creates parallel systems. When enough people withdraw, they stop supporting the same economic and social structures. Men build alternative networks, different hobbies, different priorities, different paths to fulfillment. Online spaces became one of the first places this shift consolidated. Communities focused on finance, gaming, fitness, and self development grew rapidly. Content that once centered purely on entertainment began incorporating discussions about purpose, boundaries, and long term planning. Men started talking to other men about what worked and what did not without the pressure to perform or posture. At the same time, dating dynamics continued to concentrate attention on a smaller pool of highly visible individuals. This created the illusion of abundance while increasing competition and dissatisfaction. Many men observed this pattern and chose not to participate in it at all. As economic uncertainty increased, another shift occurred. Men without dependence discovered they could adapt more easily. Minimalism became a strategy rather than a trend. Smaller living spaces, fewer expenses, and flexible work allowed for resilience. Instead of expanding their lifestyles, many men deliberately simplified them. Technology accelerated this process. Remote work reduced the need for social compliance. Digital entertainment reduced the need for external validation. Online learning reduced the need for institutional approval. Men no longer needed permission to build a life that made sense to them. What makes this moment unique is that it is not driven by anger, it is driven by calculation. Men are not trying to punish anyone. They are optimizing for peace, stability, and autonomy. And once those needs are met, there is little incentive to return to systems that previously drained them. And this is where misunderstanding often arises. From the outside, disengagement looks like apathy. From the inside, it feels like clarity. Men are not lost. They are not confused. They are not waiting to be convinced. They have already made a choice. As this choice spreads, its effects ripple outward. Industries built on social interaction feel the strain. Narratives that assume male participation struggle to adapt. Policies designed for past assumptions no longer align with present behavior. And yet, much of the public conversation continues as if this is a temporary phase. It is not. Once people experience peace, they are reluctant to surrender it. Once autonomy is tasted, it is difficult to trade it back for obligation without reward. Once time and money are reclaimed, they are not easily given away again. This is not the end of relationships. It is the end of unbalanced ones. It is the end of participation without purpose. It is the end of effort without reciprocity. Men are not vanishing, they are reorganizing, and the world is only beginning to notice. As this withdrawal accelerates, something else becomes visible, something that many people were not prepared to acknowledge. When men step away, entire systems begin to wobble. Not because men are superior or more important, but because so much of modern infrastructure quietly depended on male participation without ever admitting it. When that participation fades, the gaps become obvious. For decades, society operated under the assumption that men would continue to show up no matter how they were treated, that they would absorb pressure, criticism, and expectation without complaint, that they would keep producing, providing, and paying while being told they were unnecessary, outdated, or replaceable. That assumption is no longer holding. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. The most immediate shift appears in everyday economics. Dating culture was not just social, it was financial. Restaurants, cafes, entertainment venues, and travel experiences were built around couples and courtship. Men paid for the majority of these interactions, often without reciprocity or appreciation. As men stopped dating, those revenue streams quietly dried up. This did not happen overnight. It happened slowly. Then, all at once, bars that once relied on men buying drinks noticed fewer transactions. Clubs filled with people but generated less revenue. The atmosphere changed. Without male spending, the energy shifted from excitement to stagnation. What remained was not liberation, but imbalance. Gyms provide another example. Men made up the majority of consistent gym memberships for decades. When harassment claims, social pressure, and surveillance culture increased, many men stopped attending public gyms altogether. Instead of protesting, they adapted. They built home gyms. They joined invite only spaces. They trained alone or with trusted groups. Gyms that once thrived on male attendance struggled to survive. The same pattern emerged in movie theaters. Films that openly criticized or mocked male audiences saw declining ticket sales. Men did not campaign against them. They simply stopped watching. Streaming replaced theaters. Selective consumption replaced cultural participation. When entertainment stopped reflecting their interests or values, men disengaged. At the same time, digital spaces expanded. Gaming communities grew not just as entertainment hubs, but as social ecosystems. Strategy, cooperation, competition, and progression replaced ambiguity and emotional labor. For many men, these environments felt fair. You put in effort, you receive results. You respect others, you are respected. You fail, you learn. There is no pretense. This is where outsiders often misunderstand the role of video games. Games are not an escape from reality. They are structured environments that reward competence and consistency. In a world where many men felt judged regardless of effort, games offered clarity. This is why gaming replaced dating for so many men. Not because games are superior to human connection, but because they are predictable and honest. Another shift occurred in how men approached friendships. Many men stopped maintaining mixed gender friendships not out of hostility, but out of boundary setting. Emotional expectations, misinterpretations, and social risk made these relationships feel costly. Male friendships, by contrast, often required less explanation and less performance. Silence was acceptable, distance was understood, loyalty was assumed. As men simplified their social lives, they also simplified their financial goals. Instead of striving for lifestyles designed to attract partners, they focused on sustainability, smaller apartments, fewer possessions, lower overhead. This allowed them to save and invest even during economic downturns. While inflation pressured households, single men with minimalist lifestyles adapted more easily. This adaptation revealed a deeper truth. Men without dependence experience economic stress differently. They do not need to maintain appearances. They do not need to fund lifestyles for others. They can pivot quickly. They can downsize without shame. They can delay gratification without resentment. Meanwhile, public narratives continue to frame men as absent or irresponsible. But data quietly told a different story. Many men were working fewer hours by choice, not due to unemployment, because they no longer needed to fund expansive lifestyles. They paid less tax, consumed less, and participated less in systems that previously relied on them. This created tension at the institutional level. Governments rely heavily on taxation tied to consumption and income. When a large demographic reduces both, revenue declines. Programs built on assumptions of growth face shortfalls. Yet, instead of examining why participation declined, institutions often blamed disengagement itself. At the same time, women faced a different reality. Inflation, housing costs, and rising expenses affected everyone. But single women experienced these pressures without the financial buffer that partnerships once provided. Social media platforms like TikTok became filled with videos expressing frustration, confusion, and anxiety about rising costs and limited support. These expressions were often interpreted as individual complaints rather than systemic signals. But collectively, they revealed a growing gap between expectations and reality. The assumption that independence would be easy collided with economic complexity. The idea that systems would replace interpersonal support proved optimistic. This is not a moral judgment, it is an observation. Systems are impersonal. They provide frameworks, not care. When personal support structures erode, systems struggle to compensate. Technology further accelerated these dynamics. Artificial intelligence and automation reshaped industries rapidly. Jobs that once provided stability became uncertain. Men responded by diversifying skills, exploring decentralized income, and experimenting with alternative economic models. Some turned to trading, others to digital work, others to barter and local exchange. Parallel economies began to form. Informal networks where trust and skill mattered more than credentials. These spaces often developed organically and informally, and many were male dominated not by exclusion, but by participation patterns. Entry required competence, contribution, and reliability rather than social signaling. Women were not intentionally excluded, but many lacked interest or access due to different social incentives. As these ecosystems grew, they became self reinforcing. Trust built over time. Resources circulated within the group. Outsiders found it difficult to enter without established relationships. Another technological shift further altered relationship dynamics. Platforms like OnlyFans reshaped digital labor and attention economies. As automation and AI advanced, even these platforms began to change. Synthetic content, digital personas, and automated engagement reduced reliance on traditional creators. This shift destabilized income streams that many had assumed would remain stable. At the same time, some men began forming emotional connections with AI driven chat interfaces. These interactions provided conversation without judgment, availability without obligation, and companionship without risk. While controversial, this trend reflects the same underlying motivation as gaming and solitude: control, predictability, safety. Critics often dismiss these choices as unhealthy or regressive, but from the perspective of those making them, they are rational adaptations to an environment perceived as hostile or unpredictable. When trust erodes, people seek alternatives. Another consequence of male withdrawal appeared in physical spaces. Coffee shops, bookstores, and community venues saw shifts in demographics. Men who once lingered or socialized there stopped attending. They worked remotely. They ordered online. They stayed home. These spaces lost not just customers, but atmosphere. As men removed themselves, some spaces became quieter, others more tense. Without balance, social dynamics shifted. This was not due to malice, but absence. What makes this moment particularly significant is that it is self reinforcing. Each man who opts out reduces incentives for others to participate. As participation declines, the perceived value of engagement decreases further. This creates a feedback loop that accelerates disengagement, and yet the public conversation remains focused on convincing men to return rather than understanding why they left. Appeals are made without addressing root causes. Narratives emphasize obligation rather than benefit. This approach misunderstands the nature of the shift. Men who have reorganized their lives around peace, autonomy, and self direction do not respond to guilt or pressure. They respond to value, to reciprocity, to respect. Without these, they see no reason to re enter systems that previously extracted from them. This is why calls to restore past dynamics fall flat. The past cannot be restored because conditions have changed, expectations have shifted, trust has eroded, incentives no longer align. The story unfolding is not about conflict between men and women. It is about adaptation to changing conditions. Men adapted first, quietly, without fanfare. Others are now reacting to the consequences. As this continues, society faces a choice: adjust frameworks to reflect new realities, or continue operating under outdated assumptions. Neither option is comfortable, but one is necessary. Men walking away is not a phase. It is a recalibration, a reassessment of cost and reward, a response to decades of signals received and acted upon. The silence is intentional. The absence is deliberate. And the peace many men have found is not easily surrendered. As this recalibration continues, something subtle but important happens inside the individual man who has stepped away. Time begins to stretch. Without the constant pull of social expectations, without the pressure to perform, impress, or pursue, days become quieter but also clearer. Many men report something they had not felt in years: mental space. That space becomes the foundation for reflection, planning, and self assessment. For the first time in a long time, many men are asking themselves a simple question without external noise: what do I actually want? Not what is expected of me, not what will earn approval, not what signals status, what genuinely improves my life. When that question is answered honestly, the list is often shorter than expected. Men begin cutting away excess. They stop attending events out of obligation. They stop maintaining connections that feel transactional. They stop spending money to maintain appearances. Instead, they redirect energy towards skills, health, and long term stability. The result is not isolation, but intentional living. This process often reveals how much emotional labor men were performing without realizing it. Being attentive, being patient, being understanding, being available. Over time, that labor accumulated into fatigue. Walking away was not about avoiding responsibility. It was about refusing unpaid labor in systems that offered little in return. Another important shift occurs in how men perceive risk. Relationships once felt like milestones. Now they are evaluated like investments. What is the downside? What is the opportunity cost? What protections exist if things go wrong? In an environment where legal, financial, and social risks feel asymmetric, many men conclude that the expected return is too low. This risk awareness extends beyond relationships. Men become cautious about public interactions. They avoid situations that could be misinterpreted. They reduce exposure to environments where a single misunderstanding could have long term consequences. This caution is not paranoia, it is adaptation to perceived risk. As a result, Men increasingly value environments with clear rules and low ambiguity. This explains the appeal of structured activities like gaming, coding, trading, fitness routines, and technical hobbies. These activities reward competence rather than compliance. They offer feedback without judgment. Progress is earned, not negotiated. Over time, this reshapes identity. Men stop defining themselves by social roles and start defining themselves by capability. What can I build? What can I fix? What can I learn? What can I sustain? Identity becomes internal rather than external. This internalization has economic consequences. Men who no longer seek validation through consumption reduce spending dramatically. Luxury becomes unnecessary. Convenience is prioritized over display. Tools replace toys. Quality replaces quantity. This shift alone disrupts industries built on aspirational marketing. Advertising that once relied on romantic or social incentives loses effectiveness. Messaging that appeals to status or desirability no longer resonates. Men are not trying to be seen, they are trying to be left alone. As men withdraw from consumption driven lifestyles, they also withdraw from debt driven living. Credit card balances shrink, large purchases are delayed or avoided, financial planning becomes conservative, emergency funds are prioritized, investments are approached cautiously. This creates a paradox. At a time when economic systems depend on spending, a growing demographic is intentionally reducing it. This is not a protest, it is self protection. And it is difficult to reverse because it feels rational. Meanwhile, cultural narratives continue to frame fulfillment as social and relational. But for many men, fulfillment has become solitary and skill based. Building something tangible provides satisfaction that abstract approval never did. Completing a project feels more rewarding than receiving praise. Another layer to this shift involves trust. Trust in institutions, trust in narratives, trust in incentives. Many men feel that the rules changed without their consent, that expectations increased while protections decreased. That accountability became selective. In response, they stopped relying on promises and started relying on outcomes. Observable reality replaced stated intent. Patterns replaced assurances. Men began trusting what they could measure rather than what they were told. This mindset influences everything from relationships to career choices. In this environment, advice to simply try harder or be more open feels disconnected. Men are not confused about effort, they are skeptical of reward. Without credible incentives, participation declines. As the skepticism spreads, younger generations take note. Younger men observe older men opting out and learn from their experiences. They see the stress, the sacrifices, the outcomes. They adjust their expectations early. This generational transmission accelerates the trend. Young men delay or avoid dating not because they lack desire, but because they see the cost. They prioritize education, skills, and independence first. They are in no rush to assume responsibilities that feel irreversible. This creates another feedback loop. As fewer men pursue traditional paths, those paths become less viable. Social institutions built around coupling and family formation struggle to adapt. Messaging becomes louder, but participation continues to decline. At the same time, women face a different set of pressures. Many were encouraged to prioritize independence and self fulfillment without equal emphasis on economic resilience. When costs rise and systems strain, the gap between expectation and reality becomes stressful. This is where misunderstanding often turns into frustration. Men are asked to return, to re engage, to support. But from their perspective, nothing fundamental has changed. The same risks remain, the same asymmetries persist, the same lack of reciprocity is perceived. Requests without reform feel hollow. Appeals without incentives feel manipulative. Men who have built stable, quiet lives see no reason to re enter turbulence. Another dimension of this shift involves geography. Some men choose relocation as a strategy, lower cost regions, different cultures, different expectations, not as an escape, but as optimization. They go where their resources stretch further and social dynamics feel less adversarial. Remote work makes this possible. Borders matter less. Communities form around shared values rather than shared locations. This further weakens traditional social anchors. As men relocate or retreat, local communities feel the absence and volunteerism declines. Informal support networks thin. These losses are often attributed to apathy, but they are symptoms of disengagement. Men did not stop caring. They stopped investing where they felt unvalued. Care follows appreciation. Investment follows trust. This brings us to an uncomfortable truth. Many systems relied on male goodwill, not contracts, not enforcement, goodwill. When that goodwill erodes, systems falter. Rebuilding goodwill requires more than rhetoric. It requires structural change, fairness, transparency, mutual respect. Without these, appeals fall flat. Another consequence of this shift is emotional recalibration. Men become more self reliant emotionally. They process internally. They seek fewer outlets. This can be healthy or unhealthy depending on the individual, but it reflects adaptation. Support structures among men change as well. Instead of frequent emotional sharing, support becomes practical, helping fix something, sharing knowledge, collaborating on projects. Support is expressed through action rather than conversation. This action oriented support builds quiet resilience. It does not generate headlines, but it sustains lives. As the world becomes more uncertain, this resilience becomes valuable. Men who can adapt, repair, and improvise feel less threatened by instability. They focus on what they can control. Control becomes a central theme. Control over time, control over finances, control over environment, control over exposure. These controls provide security when external systems feel unreliable. This is why attempts to shame or pressure men back into participation fail. Shame does not restore trust. Pressure does not create value. Once control is reclaimed, it is defended. Another factor often overlooked is how this shift affects male identity narratives. Traditional roles are questioned, but not replaced. Men are left to define themselves without templates. This can be liberating or disorienting. Those who succeed build identities around competence and autonomy. Those who struggle feel adrift. But even among those struggling, many prefer uncertainty over perceived exploitation. As this identity evolution continues, cultural representation lags behind. Media struggles to depict men who are content, solitary, and disengaged. Stories favor conflict or redemption arcs. Quiet stability does not sell. This creates a gap between lived experience and representation. Men who see themselves nowhere in narratives disengage further. The result is a society where participation is optional for a growing segment, where silence speaks louder than protest, where absence communicates more than argument. This is not collapse, it is reconfiguration. A shift in alignment between incentives and behavior. Whether this reconfiguration leads to renewal or fragmentation depends on how institutions respond. But one thing is clear: men who have stepped away are not waiting to be convinced. They are living differently now. And the longer they live this way, the less likely they are to return. As this new way of living becomes normalized for men, another important shift occurs that few people want to talk about openly. The idea of return quietly dies. At first, withdrawal is framed as temporary, a break, a pause, time to reset. But over time, that framing stops matching reality. Men do not feel like they are on hiatus, they feel like they have moved on. This matters because many social narratives still assume men are waiting, waiting to be invited back, waiting for conditions to improve, waiting for reassurance. But waiting implies restlessness. What is happening instead is settlement. Men are building routines, identities, and futures that do not require reintegration. Once routines stabilize, habits form. Once habits form, expectations adjust. Life without dating, without relationship obligations, without social performance becomes the baseline rather than the exception. And when something becomes baseline, returning to a previous state feels disruptive rather than comforting. This is why appeals rooted in nostalgia fail. Messages that reference how things used to be assume those memories are positive. For many men, they are not. They remember stress, confusion, pressure, and constant negotiation. The past does not feel like a golden age, it feels like a warning. As men grow comfortable with this new baseline, they begin designing their lives around it. Housing choices change. Men choose spaces that support privacy rather than social hosting. Furniture becomes functional rather than decorative. Layouts prioritize work, rest, and hobbies instead of entertainment for guests. Time management changes as well. Weekends are no longer structured around social obligations. They become flexible blocks for rest, learning, and personal projects. There is no pressure to fill time to avoid appearing lonely. Time can simply exist. This relationship with time is transformative. Many men realize they were previously living reactively, responding to expectations, filling calendars to avoid judgment. Now they experience proactive living, choosing deliberately how to spend hours and energy. That shift alone improves mental clarity. Anxiety decreases when obligations decrease. Decision fatigue lessens when choices narrow. Men who once felt overwhelmed begin to feel grounded. And this grounding affects how men view the future. Instead of long term plans centered on family formation or shared milestones, plans become modular, shorter horizons, flexible goals, contingency based thinking. If conditions change, plans adapt. This modular approach is well suited to uncertainty. It allows men to pivot without feeling like failures. It removes the pressure to predict decades in advance. It replaces rigid life scripts with adaptable frameworks. At the same time, many men develop a stronger sense of self sufficiency. Skills that were once optional become priorities: cooking, repair, basic health maintenance, financial literacy. These skills reduce dependency and increase confidence. Confidence built on capability differs from confidence built on validation. It does not require external reinforcement. It persists even when unobserved. This quiet confidence is often invisible, which leads to misinterpretation. From the outside, disengaged men can appear apathetic or unmotivated. In reality, many are deeply motivated, but toward different ends. They are not seeking approval, they are seeking stability. This misinterpretation fuels further misunderstanding. When men do not respond to traditional incentives, those incentives are intensified rather than reconsidered. Pressure increases. Messaging becomes louder. The gap widens. Another development worth noting is how men approach conflict in this new context. Instead of arguing, they disengage. Instead of defending themselves, they exit. Conflict requires investment. Men who have opted out do not see the return on that investment. This approach frustrates systems that rely on engagement. Debates require participants. Reforms require buy in. When men stop participating, discussions become one sided and less grounded. Silence is often interpreted as agreement or weakness, but silence can also be refusal, a refusal to validate systems that no longer serve the participant. As male disengagement becomes more visible, attempts are made to pathologize it, labels are applied, motivations are questioned, explanations are simplified. This response mirrors earlier stages of denial. Pathologizing allows avoidance of structural questions. If disengagement is framed as individual failure, systems do not need to change. Responsibility shifts to the individual. The pattern continues. But this strategy has limits. When disengagement reaches scale, individual explanations no longer suffice. Patterns demand systemic analysis. Another consequence of the shift is how men relate to authority. Trust in institutions declines when lived experience contradicts messaging. Men become less responsive to directives that lack practical relevance. Compliance becomes conditional rather than automatic. This does not mean men reject all authority. It means authority must demonstrate competence and fairness. Credibility replaces status. Outcomes replace titles. This mindset influences career choices as well. Men increasingly favor roles with measurable outputs and clear expectations. Ambiguous roles with subjective evaluation become less attractive. Performance based systems feel safer. This preference affects organizational culture. Teams with clear metrics thrive. Teams dependent on social dynamics struggle. This is not ideological, it is practical. As men reorganize around clarity, ambiguity becomes a liability. Vague expectations feel risky. Undefined roles feel unstable. Men choose environments where effort maps directly to outcome. This also explains the appeal of entrepreneurship and independent work. While riskier in some ways, these paths offer control. Control over workload, control over evaluation, control over reward. Men who pursue these paths accept uncertainty in exchange for autonomy. They prefer known risks over unpredictable ones. Another aspect of disengagement involves emotional boundaries. Men become selective about what they share and with whom. Emotional openness is not eliminated, but it is compartmentalized. Trust must be earned through consistency rather than assumed. This selectivity reduces vulnerability, but also reduces exposure to harm. Men learn to protect their inner lives without shutting down completely. Support networks adjust accordingly. Smaller circles, deeper trust, less frequent interaction, more reliability. As these networks solidify, they become self sustaining. Men rely less on external validation and more on mutual competence. This creates resilience that is difficult to disrupt. Meanwhile, public discourse often focuses on symptoms rather than causes. Declining birth rates, rising loneliness, economic stress. These are real issues, but addressing them requires understanding participation patterns. You cannot restore participation by ignoring withdrawal. You cannot incentivize engagement without addressing risk. You cannot rebuild trust through slogans. This is the core challenge. Systems built for participation struggle when participation becomes optional. Men are not obligated to engage. That assumption no longer holds. Engagement must be earned. Another long term implication is how this shift affects cultural transmission. Traditions rely on continuity. Skills are passed down through involvement. When men disengage from institutions, informal transmission replaces formal structures. This can be beneficial or detrimental depending on context. Some skills flourish, others fade. Adaptation continues unevenly. The most significant impact may be generational. Younger men growing up in this environment see disengagement as normal rather than deviant. They learn from observation rather than instruction. They see older men who are stable, calm, and independent. They internalize those traits. They do not see absence as failure. They see it as choice. This normalization changes future expectations. Young men are less likely to feel pressure to conform. They prioritize alignment over acceptance. As this mindset spreads, Attempts to restore previous norms become increasingly unrealistic. Norms require buy-in. Without buy-in, they are just suggestions. This does not mean cooperation disappears. It means cooperation becomes selective, contextual, conditional. Men cooperate where there is mutual benefit. They disengage where there is extraction. This principle guides decision-making across domains: work, social life, consumption, relationships. The result is a quieter society, less performative, less crowded, less transactional, but also less interconnected. Whether this leads to long-term stability or fragmentation remains to be seen. What is clear is that the old assumptions no longer apply. Men are not lost. They are not confused. They are not waiting. They have adjusted. An adjustment, once complete, is difficult to reverse. As this adjustment settles into permanence, society begins encountering a problem it has not faced in this form before. It is not open resistance. It is not protest. It is not even discontent. It is indifference. And indifference is far more difficult to confront because it offers no leverage. Men who have disengaged are not asking for reform. They are not negotiating. They are not demanding better treatment. They have simply removed themselves from the equation. This removes pressure points that systems previously relied on. When participation was assumed, incentives could be asymmetric. When participation becomes optional, asymmetry collapses. This is why so many institutional responses feel ineffective. They are designed for audiences that still care deeply about inclusion and recognition. Disengaged men care about neither. They are not seeking belonging, they are seeking stability. This creates a mismatch between messaging and mindset. Campaigns emphasize community, connection, and shared responsibility. But men who have opted out hear obligation without benefit. They hear cost without return. And so they do not respond. At the same time, expectations placed on men do not decrease. In many cases, they increase. Responsibility is emphasized while authority diminishes. Accountability is demanded while protection erodes. This imbalance reinforces withdrawal. Men who once might have pushed back now simply step aside. They do not argue policy. They do not engage discourse. They quietly reroute their energy elsewhere. This rerouting has cascading effects. Civic participation declines. Volunteer organizations struggle. Informal mentorship weakens. These losses are often attributed to generational apathy, but they are better understood as selective disengagement. Men did not stop contributing because they stopped caring. They stopped contributing where contribution felt unrewarded or risky. As this pattern continues, communities fragment, not explosively, but quietly. Shared spaces lose diversity of perspective. Conversations become narrower. Solutions become less robust. Yet the men who disengaged do not experience this fragmentation as loss. They experience it as relief. Fewer obligations mean fewer conflicts. Fewer interactions mean fewer misunderstandings. Fewer expectations mean fewer disappointments. This creates an internal logic that is difficult to challenge. If life feels better disengaged, why return? This question is rarely addressed directly. Instead, attention focuses on outcomes rather than motivations. Declining marriage rates are discussed without addressing why men avoid commitment. Lower birth rates are analyzed without addressing male participation. Economic shifts are debated without acknowledging reduced engagement. This avoidance delays adaptation. Systems cling to outdated assumptions while behavior continues to change. Another long-term consequence involves how men relate to purpose. For generations, purpose was externally assigned: provider, protector, builder, contributor. These roles came with expectations but also recognition. As recognition declined, purpose decoupled from social roles. Men began defining purpose internally: mastery, competence, self direction. These forms of purpose do not require social validation. They are self sustaining. This internal purpose reduces vulnerability to external pressure. You cannot threaten someone with exclusion if they are already self contained. You cannot shame someone who no longer seeks approval. This is why attempts to re engage men through moral obligation fail. Obligation requires belief in the moral authority of the system. That belief has eroded. Instead, men evaluate decisions through pragmatic lenses. Does this improve my life? Does this reduce risk? Does this add value? If the answer is no, they decline. This approach simplifies decision making. It removes emotional weight. It prioritizes outcomes over narratives. Over time, this pragmatism reshapes behavior. Men become less reactive, less defensive, less expressive, more deliberate. This calm deliberation can be misread as detachment or apathy. In reality, it is a form of boundary maintenance. Boundaries become central. Boundaries around time, boundaries around money, boundaries around energy, boundaries around exposure. Men learn to say no without explanation. They stop justifying choices. They stop over communicating. Silence becomes sufficient. This silence frustrates those accustomed to engagement. Without reaction, there is no feedback. Without feedback, strategies fail. The lack of reaction forces a reckoning. Either systems adapt to new participation patterns or they continue declining. Adaptation requires honesty. It requires acknowledging that incentives changed, that trust eroded, that expectations became misaligned. Without this honesty, responses remain superficial. Messaging changes, but structures do not. Tone softens, but risk remains. Men who have opted out recognize this immediately. They evaluate substance, not language. Another effect of disengagement is how men approach legacy. Instead of legacy through family or institution, legacy becomes personal. Skills passed to a nephew, knowledge shared in a small group, tools built to last. Quiet contributions. This form of legacy does not seek recognition. It does not scale. It does not generate metrics, but it persists. As this mindset spreads, traditional markers of success lose relevance. Titles matter less. Social visibility matters less. Stability matters more. This shift challenges economies built on aspiration. When aspiration declines, consumption declines. When consumption declines, growth slows. This creates pressure to stimulate demand. But stimulation without trust feels manipulative. Men respond by disengaging further. The cycle continues. Another underdiscussed aspect is how disengagement affects emotional resilience. Men who rely less on external validation experience fewer emotional spikes. They are less affected by praise or criticism. This emotional flattening can be healthy or numbing depending on context, but it serves a protective function. Emotional neutrality reduces vulnerability. In unstable environments, neutrality feels safe. This safety becomes addictive. Calm replaces excitement. Predictability replaces novelty. Many men prefer this trade off. This preference challenges cultural narratives that equate fulfillment with intensity. Men discover fulfillment can be quiet. Quiet fulfillment does not advertise itself. It does not demand attention. It does not seek validation. This invisibility contributes to misunderstanding. Because disengaged men are not vocal, their experiences are underrepresented. Their absence is noted, but their satisfaction is not. This leads to inaccurate assumptions that men are suffering, that they are lonely, that they regret their choices. For some, This may be true, but for many, it is not. Men who regret disengagement tend to re engage selectively. Those who do not regret it deepen withdrawal. This selective re engagement further skews perception. Visible men appear engaged, invisible men are forgotten. Yet the invisible men shape outcomes through absence, through reduced spending, through reduced participation, through reduced compliance. Absence becomes influence. This is difficult for systems to respond to because absence cannot be negotiated with, it cannot be persuaded, it cannot be coerced. The only way to counter absence is to restore value. Value requires reciprocity, it requires fairness, it requires predictability, it requires trust. Without these, disengagement remains rational. This is the core tension. Men have recalibrated based on lived experience. Appeals to emotion or obligation do not override that calibration. The longer disengagement persists, the stronger it becomes. Habits entrench, identities solidify, alternatives mature. Returning becomes less attractive over time, not more. This is why the idea of a sudden reversal is unrealistic. Even if conditions improve, trust takes time to rebuild. Men who adapted to autonomy will not rush back. The future, therefore, is not about return, it is about coexistence. Systems must function with lower participation. Communities must adapt to smaller involvement. Expectations must reset. This adaptation may be painful. It may involve contraction. It may involve simplification. But ignoring the shift only delays necessary change. Men walking away did not create this moment, they responded to it. And responses, once entrenched, are difficult to undo. At this stage, what remains is not confusion, not anger, and not chaos. What remains is consequence. Consequence is quieter than outrage and slower than collapse, but it is far more permanent. It does not announce itself, it unfolds. The consequence of men walking away is not that society immediately fails, it is that society slowly loses its shock absorbers. For generations, men absorbed instability, they compensated for inefficiency, they filled gaps without recognition, they carried risk quietly. When that stops, systems are forced to operate without a buffer. And this is why so many institutions feel brittle. They were never designed to function without voluntary male participation. They assumed compliance, they assumed contribution, they assumed resilience would always be there, regardless of how it was treated. When men stepped away, they did not take anything with them except themselves. And that absence revealed how much had been quietly held together by people who no longer felt respected, protected, or rewarded. What follows is not a punishment, it is exposure. As inflation rises, as costs increase, as support systems strain, the difference between those who planned for autonomy and those who relied on stability becomes stark. Men who simplified early experience pressure differently. Their lives are leaner, their needs are fewer, their expectations are lower. This gives them flexibility. Many women, by contrast, were encouraged to build lives dependent on continuous system support. Careers assumed upward mobility. Lifestyles assumed stability. Social frameworks assumed backup. When those assumptions fail, the stress compounds. This is not about superiority, it is about preparedness. Men did not predict the future perfectly, but many adjusted instinctively. They reduced exposure, they minimized dependency, they avoided irreversible commitments. These choices now look less like avoidance and more like foresight. As a result, we are seeing two diverging experiences of hardship. One group feels trapped, overwhelmed, and betrayed by systems that no longer deliver. The other feels constrained but capable, limited but stable. This divergence fuels misunderstanding. Those struggling want solutions, those coping want distance. The conversation breaks down because the incentives no longer align. Men are not motivated by appeals to save others, They are motivated by protecting what they have built. They already learned what happens when they overextend. This brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all. Many men have reached a point where they no longer feel responsible for holding society together. Not because they hate society, but because society made it clear that their role was optional until it was needed again. Once that lesson is learned, it cannot be unlearned. Men understand now that participation without leverage is vulnerability. They understand that contribution without protection is risk. They understand that sacrifice without appreciation is extraction. So they stopped. And because they stopped quietly, many assumed they would return quietly too. But people do not return to situations they escaped from unless the conditions change meaningfully. That change has not happened. Instead, men have built alternative lives. Lives with fewer people, fewer obligations, fewer expectations, but also fewer disappointments. They have traded intensity for stability, visibility for privacy, approval for peace. This is not the life everyone wants, but it is the life many men have chosen. And as the years pass, this choice solidifies. New routines replace old habits. New norms replace old scripts. New definitions of success emerge. Success becomes waking up without dread. It becomes paying bills without panic. It becomes having time to think. It becomes knowing that no single accusation, misunderstanding, or economic shift can destroy everything overnight. That sense of security is addictive. And once experienced, it is guarded fiercely. This is why attempts to reframe disengagement and as immaturity fail. Immaturity is impulsive. This is deliberate. Immaturity seeks escape. This seeks sustainability. This is also why attempts to shame men back into participation collapse. Shame requires shared values. Men who disengaged no longer share those values. They have replaced them. At the end of the day, this is not about men versus women. That framing is convenient but incomplete. This is about incentives versus behavior, about risk versus reward, about autonomy versus obligation. Men were told repeatedly that they were not needed, that their presence was optional, that their instincts were flawed, that their silence would be preferable to their involvement. They listened, they went away, they found peace. Now the world is discovering what happens when those words are taken seriously. As society adjusts, some will adapt. New forms of cooperation will emerge, smaller, more intentional, based on reciprocity rather than assumption. Others will struggle, waiting for a return that never comes. The future will not look like the past. It will be leaner, quieter, more fragmented, more intentional. Men walking away did not cause this future. They simply prepared for it earlier than most. And now they are no longer interested in being convinced. Before we end, I want to hear from you. What did you think about what was discussed in this video? Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? Leave a comment and share your thoughts because this conversation is not going away. And like the video if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.